Ready, I'm good to go.
Okay. We start out with a baseline question. State your full name and spell it.
I'm Ann McKay Thompson, A-N-N, no E, M-C capital K-A-Y-T-H-O-M-P-S-O-N.
Do I have permission to record this interview?
You do.
Where and when were you born?
I was born in 1946 in Hot Springs, South Dakota. December 27th. I was supposed to be the second coming, but I missed it a day or two.
Tell us about your growing up years and the journey that led you to work in South Dakota government. Focusing on the growing up years first.
Well, I had a wonderful family. They were Main Street business families. Started out in Hot Springs, had the drugstore. Jewelry stores went with the drugstore at the time. And then Dad worked with Grandpa. He was in the business. Went down the street, opened his own jewelry store after Grandpa was gone, and just dealt with jewelry. My mom tried to kill the church ladies. They had uranium going on, digging up in Edgemont, and they had trailings from that, said you can all come and take it, use it for your gardens or whatever, and it had a nice little fuzzy yellow look to it. I remember the bowl. Church lady said, well, let's make earrings out of those and maybe get some money. So Mom said, well, I'll sell them in the store. And I remember this big basket loaded with these uranium earrings, and they sold them all. I don't know who got cancer or not, but that's before we knew anything. Then we moved up to Lead. The economy of Hot Springs was a little iffy at the time, and Lead was booming. It was in the golden years of Homestake Mine, and Dad had a jewelry store right on Main Street, and it was wonderful. I was kind of Dad's girl. I was the golfing partner, and he was a real athlete. And I worked in the store, had my own office in the store, went on buying trips. I did things really young, never a question about doing them. Lots of high school activities. Debate, probably one of the greatest, the plays, the everything. And the girls had their own gym. We had a fully operational growing up experience where women were into sports too. There wasn't anything we weren't doing. And then from there, I had two brothers. They were older, always gave me a hard time. And then I went on to college and decided to go in-state. And then from there on, became a wife and a mother and a worker and devoted to South Dakota.
Where'd you go to college?
I went several places. I went to the University of South Dakota. Then I went to Northern Arizona University to start my master's work. And then I came back to the university and received a master's in debate, theater, speech, audiology. All of those were part of that degree. Was interested in business school, but they weren't really letting women in at the time. They weren't encouraging that at all. Was interested in law, hardly any women at all. 3 years later, different story. So it was a time where you weren't quite sure. They were not encouraging women at all. There weren't mentors in those days or whatever, but I got a really fabulous degree I got taught organization, leadership, history is a big part of that degree. So I had a sense of history and, of course, was always interested in government. Then from there, I ended up getting a Bush Fellowship, Leadership Fellow, and went to MIT. That was a great experience. Harvard and MIT instructors were both in that program, and I learned a lot from there. And then I have always taken classes or something, always, ever since then. I've never quit.
Backing up a little bit, you said that girls in Lead had their own gym.
Mm-hmm.
Was that at the school, or was it?
Yeah, it was. That high school is like the Taj Mahal. You go in it today and it's just still pristine and beautiful, and architecture on it is just stunning. We had a professional stage and theater with professional scenery that could go up and down on a weight system, a lighting system. We had everything. And the girls' gym, and we had our own teachers. I was on the trampoline team, the basketball team. We played football. I have a bad knee from that. I had a lateral meniscus removed. We had everything. We had tumbling. We had everything. I mean, it was just an exceptional school. We had lots of science. A lot of engineers came out of Lead High School. And Dad was on the school board, so I had to really behave. And I did. I behaved.
We'll get down here. That'll be interesting to get down to Title IX when you're talking about your sports experience.
Yeah, that started it.
Kind of backing up and ask how you became involved in the status of women in the ERA movement.
Well, I was a senior in college, and I was Miss South Dakota, and it was the first year that they started the Commission on the Status of Women and made it part of state government. Every state had one. It was a federal program, but became a state program. And so I traveled with the governor and the travel officials that year. The legislature had made me an official ambassador. So it was the first time they'd ever done that. And so I was kind of connected with that. And the governor, Farrar, appointed me on that committee as a college student. And so I was involved in the issues starting in college. And that's how that got started. And then when I got married and moved to Pierre, the governor appointed me to head it. And I was, I think, 23 at the time. I was the youngest in the nation heading that kind of thing.
What did you have to do, and was it mostly in South Dakota, or did you have to travel to?
I did both. We mainly did things in South Dakota, and it was the committee that the governor put all of the women on. I mean, they were fabulous, interesting ladies. They were doctors, they were lawyers, they were big political leaders. They were just pillars of their community. And they weren't putting women on other commissions at the time. This kind of was the dumping place to see we've got women involved. And I don't think the governor had any idea where we were all headed. But what was your question again?
Well, where did you travel much out of state, or was it mostly focused?
Well, it was mainly a focus on the state. Every commission could design their own emphasis to find out what the status of women was. And so when I became chair, we picked about 5 areas that we were going to study, go into, take a look at the law. And then we held public hearings all across the state. They came into Pierre. And then from there, we held different seminars, different gatherings of women in Sioux Falls, in Rapid, in Pierre. Went to Custer, little tiny towns if they invited us. Then nationally, we met once a year as the state commission.
You talked about having these women of accomplishment, and do you remember some of them that were served with?
Yes, I do. In fact, I have a list. Oh, I don't know where it is. Can we take the time to find it?
Mm-hmm.
Marcia Donnan Mitchell. She ended up being the first cabinet officer, female cabinet officer, but she was a journalist with the Rapid City Journal and was the national presswoman. So she had a great background in that. Dr. Ruth Alexander from Brookings. She was on it. Lona Crandall from Sioux Falls. Mary Harmon from Spearfish. Mary Ellen McEldowney from Vermilion. Winifred Eckelberger from Pierre. Isabel Sattler from Yankton. Eunice Larrabee from Lantry. Dorothy Johnson from Aberdeen, and Lawila Hunking from Sioux Falls, and Elaine Guthmiller from Tripp. And there were others that were before, for Dr. Spears, I know, was on that, and Peg Lamont used to be on that, and some other people before it became a state commission.
What issues did you focus on?
They were, let's see, that's where we have this list here. Shall we just, do you want to list those things for me and then we'll talk about it? Is that your question?
Oh, okay, all right, yep. So
Nationally,
you,
if you want to name off these items here, most of the states dealt with these, and I'll tell you which ones we chose.
the advocating for credit for women.
Yes, in our hearings, people couldn't get a credit card in their name. They couldn't get a mortgage even though their husband's salary and the wife's salary were more than enough, but they wouldn't count the women's salary. They felt it was pin money, not serious. And they weren't recognizing that, like in Pierre, 80% of the women worked. In South Dakota had a high rate of women working in their farms, ranches, stores, that kind of thing. They simply wouldn't allow it. And so if you wanted a credit card, you had to have your husband have it. You couldn't get it. You couldn't get loans for your business. One woman who owned a business there in Pierre had her husband die, and she was devastated enough with that, but all of a sudden she couldn't get the loans for the business. And so those are the kind of things we heard. So we dealt with that issue.
Wow, yeah. Advocating for girls in sports.
That was a big one, girls in sports. That came back from my own high school experience of when we played basketball, we were only allowed 2 games with another town. We could only play half court. And there were all these restrictions. And here we are, athletes, and here's what was going on at the time. I was also a skier. We had an Olympic jump on Terry Peak. I don't think it's there anymore, but I mean, it was a big jump. But the girls, we all skied with groups, the boys and the girls together. Not many girls were skiing at the time, but they'd say, you can't jump. Why not? It'll cause you not to have babies. So many things it could make it so you can't have babies. And yet, here I am on a trampoline doing triple flips, landing on my stomach, doing a backflip from that. Here I am in gymnastics doing hand over hand. And, it wasn't making sense, but it was the thought at the time that you just have to be really careful or you can't have babies. And so we were dealing at the time with these attitudes about where women were in the world. And so I'm on the Commission on the Status of Women, and all of a sudden realizing I was one of the only towns in South Dakota that had a girls program. The only one. And yet my girlfriends from Iowa down at college, they had a huge basketball program and lots of attendees at it and made money. And so we started saying, gosh, let's take a look at that. And so my job and the job of the commission was to pull together the people for a hearing. So we invited coaches all over. And I remember sitting in a little tiny room in the State House with Don Barnett, head of education, and the Athletic Association, of course, saying, why can't women play a full basketball court? Why can't they have a basketball tournament? Why can't they have sports? Why can't they? And I said, we need to start dealing with it. So it was Mrs. Eckelberger and myself, and then the Athletic Association started these talks. And then, of course, it had to go through legislature, and that's where Lawila Hunking came in, and some of the other legislators did. But we brought in young girls that were in sports or couldn't get into sports and lined up the testimony. And so I just quietly have a smile every year when I see the basketball tournaments, and it's wonderful. I mean, girls need to be healthy, and it's a great outlet for them.
Childcare.
Childcare. We weren't able to get into that as far as some of the other states did, mainly because it was just not an accepted topic. Mostly, the fellows just didn't want to talk about it. They didn't see it as an issue. They didn't see that some families in South Dakota didn't make enough money to live on. I mean, they just didn't have that concept. They didn't understand some families have to work. Some men die. Some, and how do you support a family if you have a lot of kids? And the times were changing. Women were going back to work because the economy was such you needed more money to live. And it just wasn't there yet. So what we did is we tried to provide information if someone wanted to set up something. And that's about all we got done.
Women's health.
Women's health. We didn't deal a lot with that. We had concerns from the reservations. Some of the women came to our hearings and they just didn't have access. And of course, we weren't able to handle that issue, that access issue. That was beyond what we could do. But we heard about it. We tried to keep our eye on it of what to do. But the other thing is that women's and the doctors that worked with us said women's issues haven't been studied enough. And so when they have a heart attack, it's different than when a guy has a heart attack. But they didn't know that generally in the medical field. And there were some things like that. But again, we bring up the subject, but it was not ready yet. It was out of our hands.
And I would imagine on the Indigenous women health issues, a lot of that is the state versus federal control, the Indian Health Service versus what the state.
Yeah, the Indian Health Service became a concern. And of course, that was not under our jurisdiction as a state. And my very first job was at the Pure Indian Learning Center. And I worked with the health issues with the young girls there. And I knew what some of them were going through. It's access. It's just plain access.
Insurance?
Insurance, women paid more insurance, assuming all women are going to get pregnant. And so they had to pay for that. And it made insurance more expensive. So if you were a business and had all women, you paid a big bill. And if you had all men, they were angry because it up theirs a little, but mainly talking with the insurance industry about, does it have to be that way? And having some good talks, and it brought the issue into their industry to talk about. And that's all that we could do, is to bring the issue up with the industry.
Reproductive freedom.
We didn't deal with that when I was chair.
No.
I didn't know how I felt about it at the time because I wasn't, I was 23. And it seemed like other groups were doing that, the Organization for Women, the NOW organization, and I didn't belong to that one. And there was the right to life. And what I didn't realize is that was becoming a national wedge in this whole thing of women's rights. What we were doing. I mean, we were traditional women at the time. I mean, I was cheerleader and homecoming queen. I mean, I wasn't an activist, feminazi. I mean, these were just things of women need access to jobs that pay higher because we're dealing with poverty here. And they need access to a good paying job. And when I was Secretary of Labor, I found out that They had a coding on their card system that says only men, send only men. And I had to cut that out. Say, no, women need access to that too. It's just a stereotypical thing. If they're capable, they should be able to interview. So anyway, that was part of the issue. I always invited the Right to Life or any other group that wanted to be a part of this, because there were so many issues with the status of women that everybody should belong. I don't think they saw it that way though, but I did. I mean, we need to work together, but they're big issues.
Women, welfare, and poverty.
That's where we didn't know what to do with that. We just knew that we had to call attention to the fact that not all women are able to be in the home and not work outside the home and have a wonderful life. It isn't that way in rural South Dakota. We had people bring up the fact that there is horrible abuse going on in the rural area. And for the next years that I worked in other jobs too, I would have a doctor take me aside and say, please bring a course down on abuse. Please, do this kind of thing. We had a lot more of that going on in South Dakota than people realized. A lot of it. And the reason they could do it is the wife couldn't leave, or the girlfriend or whatever, because there was no money. They could not survive. And so we heard that. And of course, not too long from then, a different group took over the Commission on the Status of Women and got rid of it. So, I mean, you couldn't even study the issue, but we knew it was there.
Women in business.
That was a big one. I think women started visualize this. Here's a piece of paper, all filled with X's. And then here's a zero. The zero is the woman with all the men that are there. All the attention can go to that woman. And boy, if you aren't good, you're not qualified, you shouldn't be in here, we don't want you here. Or if she's really good, she has to be really, really good to be accepted. But once other businesses started having more women in it, then the focus wasn't on the one. All of a sudden, you become part of a group. It melds together. And the fact that you're a woman doesn't play as much anymore. When I went to MIT, I learned a lot of things, and one thing I learned was a lot of men don't know how to view women. Like, they know a woman as a mother, a sister, an auntie, a grandma, a girlfriend, a wife. They don't know her as a colleague. There's certain things you do not do and address a woman if it's a colleague. And we found out, I was the first female in the MIT class. There were 2 of us. And I remember that first day, guys sat next to us and put a move on us within 5 minutes. It was the most disgusting thing. And we went up to the instructor and said, could you move us? They thought they were being nice, but they were using tactics for a girlfriend or a wife or something, not a colleague. And it became part of a chapter in my book of how do you deal as colleagues. And a lot of men, when I did my interviewing for the book with Simon & Schuster out of New York, who was the publisher, it was, why don't you hire women? And some of the answers were, we don't want to be tested. It's just a way to get rid of temptation. And that's how they felt. If they weren't around, they wouldn't be tempted to have an affair or whatever. And I just realized that at the time we really do need to train men and women how to work together. And I remember I always felt like it was my job to make the guys comfortable working with me and that I wasn't a threat to them. I wasn't a threat to their wife. I wasn't, I always felt that I had to take that role and kind of set the stage. And yeah, it's okay for a guy to open a door. You do that for anybody that needed help. And some of them felt that the women were men haters, and that just wasn't true. I mean, it just wasn't true. But we had to do this era of teaching and learning how to work together as colleagues.
Did you resent the fact that you had to do all that extra work
No.
just to get along?
I didn't resent it because it was the only way to make it happen. It was the only way. And I knew enough about it. I mean, I was in the world. I knew what seemed to work. One of the things I know that one of the questions one of the people wanted you to ask me was, did I have to get in that door, or was it easy or whatever? I never asked for half the jobs I got. They just said, Ann, we'd like you to work with us. Would you be willing to, or what's it going to take? And I mean, I went through the doors. It was like, oh my gosh. And the reason was I wasn't threatening. Although I just had to have a tough spine. We all did. And that if it's the right thing to do, then you just can't worry about it. I mean, that's part of politics. It's part of life. You just need to know what you stand for, trust yourself, and those that know you know it. And so I had invitations for jobs or lots of committee work. I was the first woman on the Indian Affairs Commission. They made me an officer right away, which I was very honored at because there are so many matriarchs in the families that I know. And I was very honored by that. And I was not offended because I just felt that was the way it had to happen.
I think that question was from Rick Noby.
It was.
Was the door opened, or did you have to open it yourself, push it open? And then I guess that follow-up, once in the room, did you feel you had to work harder than anyone else to be effective and respected?
Did we have to work harder? Yes, we did. And my whole thing was to be one step ahead of everybody. I had to be. I mean, like when I started Capital University Center, not just me, but it was not accepted because we were going to take education off of campus. The whole idea was education's got to be more than just the 18 to 21-year-old. Adults are changing jobs 7 times in their life, careers. I mean, education needed to be lifelong. It needed to be with adults that never had a chance when they were 18. They didn't have the money or family situations. And that was a new concept, and they didn't like it. I mean, everything had been geared to, here's how it'll work on campus. And so I lost my point there.
I think you were talking about whether you had to be ahead of everybody,
Yeah.
or work harder than everybody, or...
Yeah, you did. And that earned the respect because it said, okay, you thought it out, you looked it up, you're not shooting from the hip. We couldn't get by with that kind of thing. You had to have the credentials, you had to have your education, you had to have experience, you had to look the part. You didn't wear funny clothes, that dressing for success came in at the time. You need to wear the suit, but you wear the bow tie that's fluffy. It's coming back now, so that you looked the part. I mean, all of that played in, the physical look, the everything else. And I remember one of the people you've interviewed with Kitty, I remember we were both leadership fellows, Bush leadership fellows, and I remember she was being interviewed, and one of the interviewers said, I don't know, she's so darn pretty, I don't know if she should get it or not. And I thought, oh no, you're too pretty to get something now. Where's the balance here?
And you talk about taking that education off campus that what you did with Capital University, and then of course all the universities did that later.
Here was what happened. We had an economic crisis in central South Dakota in the 80s. Ag went down the tube. Nobody was building houses. A lot of jobs went kaput. Farm wives, farm husbands were coming in to get other jobs to support it. We had a governor that decided he wasn't going to do any hiring in Pierre. He put a freeze on it, started sunsetting things, and all of a sudden we had an economic crisis. We also had with that the idea that healthcare needed more trained people, not just assistants. They needed to have more knowledge about healthcare. We didn't have anywhere to commute to get that. So every nurse that didn't have the credentials had no way to get it. So the community, a couple of guys, Shan Burke and Hank Wagner, who really cared about the capital city in central South Dakota, came to me, and I was able to organize something from nothing. I cultivated that over the years. I always loved jobs that didn't have any basis and you start from scratch. And they said, we need a university. And I said, gosh, I just came from state government and we don't need any universities. We've just had 3 private schools close. So I put my head together and I thought, well, why don't we have a conglomerate of all these universities according to what we need for economic development? And no one school had all the programs we needed. So I proposed to the board, let's call it a university center. I only worked with presidents and the Board of Regents. The reason is, down the line, they had perfected their system on campus, and their first word was no. I learned that if you start something new, you go right to the top, because they're willing to deal with ideas. So that's what we did, is we said, strictly for adults, and of course the people on campus said, oh my gosh, they're going to take our kids away. No, they needed an on-campus experience. Adults don't need the fraternity, they don't need the beer parties, they don't need the socialization, they don't need the girlfriend, all of this. And so we had to be careful with pictures that we didn't show an adult with a backpack on, which was a college look. Instead, I did a marketing campaign with Lawrence and Schiller out of Sioux Falls. They were classmates of mine in college, and we took pictures of a lady with the baby reading. We took somebody on a break in the back room at the grocery store studying physics, while they're on break. We did all of this working thing to show them, here's what we're trying to do. We're very careful with it. And so what we did is we changed the culture, which is education is not just for the young person anymore. We pioneered interactive television. We had a great relationship with South Dakota State. By then, the University of South Dakota said, no, we're not going to give you any more, because we were booming with adults. We had 2,000 seats filled that one year. I mean, that's more than some of the colleges had. They were all adults. Every one of them couldn't go to campus. And so we had these programs then for them that worked out just great. And the campuses finally trusted us. If they were going to take courses from 4 universities, they had to fill out 7 sheets of paper each one. I went to a data company and said, will you write us a program and we'll beta test it for you to take all of these things, put it in one sheet, and then spit it out according to what each college needed. So that's being the step ahead and not making us be a problem for them. Don't be a problem. And it worked. We had 22 years of in the black running. We knew every penny where it went. We worked, the model was use existing schools, use existing buildings, don't get into that. And that's why we were able to do it. Very practical.
What happened to the university?
They didn't follow the model. They wanted all full control back on campus. I remember when I had meetings with the universities, I had my board go in before me, the gray-haired banker, the former legislator, the respected chamber president, the economic development people. They all went in before me. And that's so that they couldn't attack me. They had to deal with, oh my God, we're dealing with a region. We're dealing with communities. And I kept myself out of it because I was the one they could easily attack and say, oh, she just wants a job, or she, and things like that were said. And then the people on campus did not want it to happen off campus. It meant more work. It did, and I know that. But we tried to get them money. We'd go lobby money for them. And that's what we did. I remember one occasion we got together 250 people from central South Dakota, 31 hospitals, nursing homes, and clinics that did not have nurses. I mean, they had no way to get new nurses. They are not a mobile group. They don't come from college and move wherever the job is. They go where their boyfriend is, their family is, or where they can get the most pay. Wasn't rural South Dakota. And so we had to grow our own. And we got them in the Capitol building. They all wore a great big green name tag. They all went in the Appropriations Committee room, and not 1 cent went to us. It all went to the university. And that's what we did for them. We made them look good. Public television, we partnered up with state. We made a loop out of the TV. And we did interactive TV and got the #1 award that year for interactive TV lessons. It was a physics course, and you'd take that camera right down and could see every physics experiment. And we used a fabulous person from campus to do that. They didn't have to travel. And it was a real national model. And we had a lot of national attention. I was invited to Vienna to present a paper on it, international group. And I mean, it was very successful, but then they put one in Rapid and one in Sioux Falls, but they didn't use the model. They didn't involve the city. They just didn't use the model. And plus, one of them was lucrative in Sioux Falls, and they wanted the money on campus. I mean, it was like free money. Out here, the colleges were being given less money in programs, and they were able to use that money to fund things on campus. So for a while, it was a pretty good deal, but they got the prices so high, they were at the level of a private college. Then it became where adults said, hey, it's not worth my time. I won't get my money's worth. So in a sense, it kind of ruined itself, and it didn't follow the model, and by then, the people that were the spokespersons for it were all retired or moved on. It's sad.
Yeah. Now, there's a question where we looked at education has been a significant threat through your life. Ask how your time as director and founder of the Capital University Center tie back to your time in the Department of Ed, and before that as a teacher. Is there anything in there that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, the teacher. That was...
part?
After the Pure Indian Learning Center, I was hired as a teacher there in the capital city. And we had the quarter system, so I had all sorts of subjects, like sometimes 4 a day, 5 a day. So all those preps. And it ended up where I had 11 courses I taught, and I finally couldn't even cope with it. I had all of the research, all of the writing. But what I had was a joyfulness of being a teacher and watching kids learn. One of my former students that now is a retired banker out here said, yeah, I took her class in mythology. I thought it was going to be a slough senior course. Well, I made them write their own myth. I made them do all sorts of things, but it was so fun. And what I've realized is I've worried about these kids since the day I taught them. And I just wondered, how are they? And I am back in touch with so many of them. And it's wonderful. And I apologized to one. I said, "Oh, I had to be the worst teacher for you. You were so bright, I could not reach you." And he said, "Oh, no, you were my favorite teacher." He said, "I was just that way with everybody." I didn't know that, you know. Anyway, that was wonderful, and I realized I liked being a teacher, and it affected everything I did. Plus, what I learned is if you hurt somebody verbally, they'll remember that the rest of their life. And I made so sure that I never demeaned anybody. I didn't want them to carry that, ever. And it made a big influence later on. I was more direct, I think, later on, and it could have been abrasive, I don't know. But being direct also is a positive thing when you're trying to work with public policy issues.
Okay, here we come to the awards. Oh, the Bill Clinton, President's Advisory Committee on the Arts, Kennedy Center. That's pretty good. Huh?
I loved that appointment.
Yeah.
We went all over the nation and visited different cities of art and what they had accomplished. And the whole idea was, and I am a true believer in that. I've always been connected to the arts since I was a little kid. And I think that the arts are part of our soul. And that if we don't do the things that feed our soul, we're not a human country. And we have to have that imagination. We learn that through the arts. We learn individuality through the arts. I just am such a strong supporter. And so I was thrilled to be a part of the President's Committee.
National Woman of Achievement, National Federation of Press Women.
Yeah, the press women thing came from when I wrote a book with my co-author, Marcia Mitchell. This is the book here. What happened is we were very nationally in tune with the women of the nation. And what we're finding out is at the time, we didn't have mentors. It was not something men felt they could do because it doesn't look right. And what we did is we observed. They were our mentors, but from a distance, we observed. We saw how they worked, what looks like it could get people to move in a direction that's positive. And so anyway, I had so many people say, you know, could you write down some things? And so I did a national search to begin with on things that were written for women, and there were very little at the time, very little. And so I wrote down a list. I went to Washington, D.C., where my co-author was. She was with the American Film Institute. And I said, here's our list. You want to write a book? She's the author. I mean, I learned from her. She'd already written a bunch of books on various things. So we wrote 4 chapters in an outline with a nonfiction book. We got an agent, went to New York, visited the publishing houses, and by golly, Simon & Schuster bought our book. And then we finished it. Novels, you have to write the whole thing. And so we spent the next year writing it, and then the next year just doing the galleys and all that it takes to get it out. And we wrote it, Management Strategies for Women. Now that I'm boss, how do I run this place? That was meant to be humorous because we felt we needed to put humor into the lives of women in the workforce because they all saw us nationally as so serious and feminazis and, you know, just, I don't know, the image was just not good and it wasn't real. So when the hardcover got done and we did TV shows all over America, that was fun. They then went into the trade back paperback, and this is the size trade. And we took off that subtitle. And the book did really quite well, and it won the Press Women Award. We got national recognition for it. It was one of the top 3 books in America for them. And then they gave me the Outstanding Presswoman thing, and I think because I'd been giving speeches and talks, you know, some things just lead to others. And so that was a real honor. That was a huge honor. My father-in-law had just died, and so I chose not to go to the national thing. I didn't think I'd win the Presswoman thing, and I did, and they called up and said, oh my gosh, we've never had anybody not be here. And so I took a quick flight down to Colorado, and I don't think I even told anybody I'd gotten it. I mean, who do you tell on things like this? So anyway, I was very honored.
The ABEX Award for South Dakota Chamber of Innovation.
Yeah, the ABEX was an award the state chamber was putting out for innovation, and they had a number of things. And our Capital University Center concept won one of those awards that year.
Nice.
I was really proud of that.
Congressional reception for Ann and Marcia Wood, Washington, D.C., hosted by Hepler, Fielder, and Robert.
Yeah, our congressional delegation had us come to Washington and gave us a reception on the book, and wanted their other colleagues to know about it. That was fun.
Service to the state of South Dakota, non-alumni award, South Dakota State University.
Yeah, South Dakota State gave me that award, and I did actually take periodic classes from them, more graduate level things, and anyway, they just felt with the things that I guess I'd done statewide, and especially Capital University Center, that they wanted me to have that. And oh my gosh, Tom Dashiell was put in that year too, and I knew Tom really well, and I had cancer. I was bald as a bat. And I think the Woster family, of course, was always at those events and had to go out into the field, you know, during the halftime and everything, and the wind was just blowing, and so I was like this the whole time because I knew my wig was going to fly right off. It didn't. I held it on. I looked kind of screwy, but...
First year showcase speaker, National Speakers Association.
Yeah, after I wrote the book with Marcia, I became a member of the National Speakers Association, and they chose me to be a first-year showcase speaker. In other words, the new people that are coming on board. That's a whole profession. I mean, and boy, do they make money. You know, they have the tapes in the back of the room, and these are consultant speakers that just, we know them all, Wayne Dyer and anybody. I mean, they just make thousands because they are very important. And so I had the opportunity to speak in front of thousands of people. It was a good experience. And I had some really nice comments afterward, and a possibility to work with some of them that are really popular now. And then our airlines got deregulated. So I couldn't count on getting to a speech if I wanted to. Plus, we had had both children by then, and they were little. And my husband was really, really busy with his national organization, and it was just like, I can't do this. And yet I would have loved it, but there was also a part of it that wasn't enriching. I need real relationships. And this was kind of an audience out there, and they clap, and that doesn't fill my soul. I gotta either really know that it's helpful, or why would you do stuff? And it just didn't fit my life, and I chose my family. That's what I wanted. I mean, you can't have kids and not be there and raise them. I didn't want anybody else doing that. And there's such joy in being a mother. I love that job. I still love that job. I don't mother them anymore, I think. But I like hanging around them.
Third place, National Winter Nonfiction Book, Federation of Presswomen.
Yeah, that's when the Federation picked our book as one of the top 3 books.
Recipient of one of 10 Outstanding Young Women of America Award.
Yeah, that one surprised me. I got the notice that I was one of the 10 in America, and I thought, my gosh, how did this happen? And I found out when we did the Equal Rights Amendment, which was a successful passing, one of the national leaders that worked with the president came to our state. I invited her because we had such a myth going on about what the Equal Rights Amendment was. And there are minority reports and majority reports, and there are things in Washington that curb some of these myths of what would happen. Some of them are, and I'm going to read these because I think they're interesting. And I'll get back to that award then that I got. One of the myths is a woman's place is in the home. And the thing is, times had changed. Families no longer had 9 to 12 children. There was birth control. They were having 1 and 2 and 3. And there were goods that were already made. Grocery stores had boxed cake mixes now, and it wasn't from scratch, and you didn't have to grow your own and can all the food. And it was not an agrarian society all over America anymore. And so our thought was a woman needs a choice. If she wants to work in a field or go to a certain degree, I mean, we had no women in medical school, no women in law school, and scholarships were not given to women, they were only given to men. And I mean, there were all these constraints that were happening, and yet half of all women, 18 to 64, were in the workforce. And America just hadn't recognized it yet. Women aren't seriously attached to the labor force, they only work for extra pocket money. And nearly half were working because of pressing economic need. And women were out ill more than male workers, and they cost the company more. And the research showed that that is not true. They only had not even 1 more day than men. Men had basically the same time out for work. Let's see, the married women take jobs away from men. In fact, they ought to quit these jobs that they have now and go back home. And so the data showed how many men needed to stay at home because of their illness or other reasons. It showed that is not happening because there's more jobs now. I mean, America is just producing more and more jobs. So there's a workforce issue of people to fill those. That they should just stick to women's jobs. Now, in all of this big chart, there was secretary, nurse, teacher. Those were the main 3 jobs out of this whole pile of jobs. And they didn't pay anything. And so what it was doing is depriving families of income. And the same thing is true today. Our jobs that pay the $1.5 million a year to the CEO, you won't find women in them in South Dakota. There's only 1, maybe 2. And they need access to that money for their family too. Why can't they have equal access to the money? So things like that. Men won't work with women because there were some that said, I'm not going to have any woman telling me what to do. And so that's why women started their own business. They said, well, I'm not going to work in that environment. I don't want to do that to you or whatever. I'm going to start my own. And women's businesses have just flourished. Well, anyway, the people nationally saw what we did in South Dakota and how it got organized. And I had started by then a number of other things. And somebody evidently saw that and recognized it and picked me then and advocated. So the one of 10 Outstanding Young Women of America was just unbelievable, really honored. Tom Daschle, that same time period, got one of the 10 outstanding young men. And I thought, gee, he's so much more accomplished. So you never know where you fit in.
Special Governor's Award for exceptional service to the state.
Oh, when I was Miss South Dakota, I traveled all over. I was going to college full time, but still traveled all over the United States for economic development for South Dakota, and talked about the youth and our goals and our value systems. And they used me to represent the youth. And so the governor gave me an award at the end of my reign, and I thought that was really nice. So it was called a special governor's award that he did.
Was that for
It was for our
official ambassador for South Dakota to the state legislature?
Yeah, that was interesting because of the way the Economic Development Department and Tourism were functioning and asking me to join them. The legislature wanted me to come and speak. They called me up at college and said they'd like to have a joint session with you. And I came up and I gave a speech, and I don't remember what I said, but the newspaper said I got a standing ovation, and I thought, I wish I knew what I said. I had no idea, but I was really enthusiastic about South Dakota because our success as youth was go out of state for college, get a good job out of state. You were a success, not stay and develop our state. And I had tried to switch that in my youth, saying, no, we've got to work hard at being inventive and seeing what we can do here. And I think that started my love for the state. You couldn't get me to move someplace else. You just couldn't. I mean, our values here and our families here, and that's so important to feel grounded. Feel grounded, and so many people don't get that opportunity. We know everybody. Heavens, every town is like a big neighborhood. We just have a long driveway in between, It's a great place.
Pure Pride Award for a citizen who helps develop
Oh,
the community.
God, Pure Pride Award. That one took me off balance, I tell you. It's the award they give to somebody that, works hard for the city and all. And I was getting ready to leave to go to Sioux Falls to work with the University Center there. And one of my friends just said, hey, that event's tonight, why don't you come with me? And I said, oh, I'll try to get ready. And I think I was late or something, and I sat with her, and then they called my name. I was speechless. I mean, I just had no concept at all that I'd get that one. It just made me cry. That one did.
Bush Fellowship at MIT.
Oh my God, the Bush Leadership Fellow was one of the best things that happened to me. And the reason is I got to test my ideas with another group. And I mean, they ran us through everything. We learned negotiation. We learned how to deal with getting like a pipeline through, and public policies. How do you make those happen? How do you build bandwagons? How do you do? And it was just so reaffirming because women never got feedback. You never were told, wow, you've developed good, here, keep that up, or there just wasn't ever any. And wow, we got that there. And you felt like you tested out things and you could really do some things that you wanted to do. It was one of the best experiences of my life.
A rural partnership on the High Plains, the paper by you and Barbara Audley.
Oh, that was an invitation with a international group. And we were invited to write about the partnership between South Dakota State and the University Center in Pierre and how we made that happen. And that was a wonderful experience too, because we heard world partnerships going on, and we learned from them, and people really had a big interest in what we were doing.
South Dakota Woman of the Year, or South Dakota Flying Farmers and Ranchers. That's interesting.
Yeah, I loved my father-in-law. He was a rancher, and in South Dakota you use little planes, to take a look at your ranch. And golly, he had 10,000 acres, and they were hilly, and it was by the river, Mission Ridge. Buffalo Ranch was right across the road. And anyway, flew it with a little J3, which is a paper airplane. It's canvas. And the gas gauge is a cork on a wire. And if the wire is up, your gas tank is full. And if it's not up, a little bend, you're out of gas. Had a speedometer, wind speed indicator, and a stick, with your ailerons so you worked on your feet. And so anyway, he also had a Bonanza, which was a faster airplane. And we decided if we're up in the air, we better know how to fly things. And so between him and my husband, they encouraged me to try out flying, so I did. And I remember the first time I soloed, they actually have practice fields in the air. Went out by the dam and was flying around, and the season was changing, so it was getting darker earlier, and I wasn't paying attention. And there's no radio in the plane. So I'm saying, oh my God, I better head back or I'm going to be flying in the dark, which would not be appropriate at all. So I go in to land, and I noticed that tetrahedron had changed, meaning the wind changed. It's like a arrow. And I thought, oh my God, you got to land into the wind when you fly. So I thought, I'll take another turn. I'll figure out how to get the other way. I landed, I went over to the hangar, and guy came out and he said, oh gosh, Ann, they're going to take away your learner's permit here. And I said, why? And he said, you've got 2 commercial airline up there circling until they got you in. And so anyway, I wasn't the best pilot. And the other thing is, I wanted to look around all the time, and you really have to pay attention. So I became a better navigator than a pilot. But they gave me the Outstanding Woman Award. The Flying Farmers did that year. I didn't deserve it.
So what'd you do to win the Grand Talent Award for Miss
America? Miss America, oh my gosh. Do you know that they still give more scholarship money than anybody in the world? More than a Harvard or Yale or whatever. It's that big. I was helping somebody else with a theater presentation. This property's condemned. It's a Tennessee Williams thing. And he was in the islands somewhere. And you can't go on national TV if you're a finalist without their permission. Couldn't find him. And I had done this cutting from his play and decided to use it myself for this talent. And they couldn't find him anywhere. And so I don't know if I'd have gone further or not, but they gave me a Grand Talent Award, and it was enough money to pay for my entire master's degree and to live on. And I mean, I was just thrilled. And then what I got from that, one of my judges wrote me, and she said, why don't you come to New York and let me get you going on Broadway? And I went to my department and I said, what do you think of this letter? They didn't think much of it, and I thought, okay, you're trying to tell me I'm not that good. Well, last year I finally saw my department head, and I said, when I came in and talked to you about that, I really realized I wasn't that good. And he said, oh no, it wasn't anything about that. He said, I just knew it was a hard life and I didn't want you going through it. So that's the one door I never went through. But it was nice of my judge to write me. And it really, I learned a lot that year. I traveled around the world 1.5 times in miles. It was pretty exciting.
The best South Dakota, obviously, that
Yeah.
led to that.
I always thought there are other ways women can do things now, but there's still something there. It's changed. They don't do the bathing suit anymore. Oh, when I was there, by the way, at Miss America, I was walking out to get my award, and a group of women's liberation women had gotten into the hall, and they were holding a protest, and they had burned their bra right outside that morning. I walked right by it, didn't know what was happening. They wanted women liberated, and so that happened when I was at Miss America. But it was an experience. It was, not many have it, where you learn to travel, you see the world, you meet people, you learn to get inquisitive. Some of the things that I learned, one of our questions was, who's had influence on you and all. And I think that the people that worked with that pageant had influence in that it was more than, I never was beautiful. I think my talent helped give some points up. And I never saw myself as that. I just saw it as an experience and a way to serve my state. Yeah, that's what I looked like.
Looked pretty good.
I don't know about that. This is Commission on the Status of Women. Look how long our hair was in those days. And this is Luila Hunking, and we were working on the Equal Rights Amendment and the sports things. In this picture, the governor gave me that. I don't know why they took it, but that was then. And anyway, I think that a couple of things really have ruled my life, and one was debate in high school and college. That we were trained to see both sides. And I still use that technique today, and I think that that's why we've been able to get some things done in South Dakota, is we'll say, I hear you. I know where you're coming from. I'm taking a look at that. I'm here to listen. But let's think of it in another way. What if we did it this way and tweaked it a little or whatever? And I think we have to recognize what people want. We don't, in the last few years, we don't do that nationally anymore. We just get our point of view and we stick with it, and you're criticized if you get off of that point of view. But I think debate teaches you to look at both sides, because we don't always have the right answer. We sometimes think we do, but we're not sure. And I think that the families are a big influencer. I know they were in mine. My father always, when I wrote the book, I wrote maxims, and it was, do what scares you the most. I mean, I'd be scared to do something, Dad'd say, oh, I'll go ahead. So I learned to do the things that frightened me. And that's where innovation comes in, and leadership. And that's a good influencer. I think that just watching how people handle conflict is important, and we're not very good at it. I think of our families. We've lived thousands of years and have had thousands and millions of families, and we still haven't learned to master some of those relationships. And I just think we have to try those things that make us a better person, and we never stop trying to be better.
South Dakota Hall of Fame.
Let's take a quick pause here.
On the home stretch.
All right, I'm rolling again. So we're
One thing we didn't cover was some stories about women, some of the stories. What was it like when I first started things, what was happening with women. Or just some of
How does
this.
the political and cultural environment, how does it differ now than it was then?
Mhm.
Okay. Compare that to the environment for women in the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Yeah.
Okay. We're rolling.
You asked me about the Hall of Fame.
Yep, the Hall of Fame. And then, did you want to respond on that, or?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, on the Hall of Fame.
It was a real honor to be inducted into the South Dakota Hall of Fame, and I was told it was because of building South Dakota. I have a funny resume. I call it my South Dakota resume. It's like, if you see something that needs to be done, you do it. It could be in the arts, it could be in science, it could be in education, it could be political, it could be whatever. And I had one of those resumes because I lived in a community that didn't really have corporations. You either owned a business or worked for state government or ranched or farmed. That was about it in central South Dakota. And that's where my family was, and that's where I was going to be. And so little things came up, and we just did them. All of us were doing that. And so when they asked me to go into the Hall of Fame, it really was an honor. And they were starting to have more women be in it. But what was wonderful about that is then they asked me to be on the board. And oh my goodness, we read 60 to 90 applications every year for people that are nominated. And the people of this state are incredible. What they do and think of, it's just amazing what they do. We're a state that takes care of people. We're a state that loves our families and loves our culture. You know, we have a caring culture in this state. And part of it's probably because we're not that populated. We know people. You meet them at your church or your club or your coffee, you know. And I just love seeing these stories. And there are people that are so humble. There are some that are not. And sometimes you see through that. But it's just an honor to every year be around people. Like, I love meeting your family. They're always there. You've got 1 million of you guys in there. And it's just delightful. It's just fun. And we're going to work on the hall. We actually have a hall, and it's a beautiful building in Chamberlain. And right now I'm working with them on putting that into an experience to where people learn about the stories of these magnificent people. And we're going to see if we can put them into holograms. Nobody's done that before. So you'll be over there speaking, and you'll be a hologram and ask maybe questions, and there could maybe be a piece of paper that has the answer you could pick up and take with you, or you could run beside Billy Mills and see if you're as fast as he is, our great Olympian from South Dakota. And it's just fun things like that that are wonderful with the South Dakota Hall of Fame.
I see here, who or what were your biggest influences?
Well, I think the influences would be my father, because he was a community man. He was on the school board and president of this or that and a businessman, and he knew what he was doing, and I learned a lot, and he was very encouraging. And then my mom taught us all how to love. I mean, nobody was better than my mom. And I just miss them both so much, even today. And then teachers, I remember one teacher in high school said, what do you want to do? Just go back into the womb and be all secure and everything else? And I mean, they gave us lessons of grow up and accept things. I remember we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we had to write about it. As what does that mean as to our country? I mean, we were taught to try to think on a higher plane, and if you didn't, you were told about it. And again, the debate coaches, great influence. And then some in state government. I mean, I watched Dick Knipe operate. I watched Frank Farrar. Those were the early public figures. And from a distance, how did they do it? I remember Frank Farrar knew everybody's name. You'd meet him once and he'd know who you were. I mean, he had incredible ability with that. And Ted Munster, who was the chief of staff for Knipe, you know, he ran state government. Dick would fly in and change something and then fly back out, and Ted would change it and get it back. We laugh about it. But I remember just watching him walk into a room and feeling like he belonged there. And I thought, someday I want to feel like I belong in a room, you know, and we just observed that kind of thing. And then there were girlfriends. We didn't have the mentors, so what happened in the capital city? Women had great opportunities in Pierre. The head of the South Dakota School Board was a woman. The head of the chamber was a woman. I was starting the university center then. There were now women in the cabinet. When I first went into state government, no women at all in administration, none. There were those kind of people running big organizations, and so we started what we called an emergency group. 4:30 or 4 o'clock, a secretary would come in and say, you have an emergency meeting at 4. That's all they'd say. And we knew where we'd meet. We'd meet at the St. Charles. They've met there for years on lobbying. And it meant somebody had a problem, we're going to solve it. So somebody had like a statewide problem, a national problem, one wanted to start a business, whatever. And so we called it our emergency group. And that's how we got through. And when I taught leadership, I said, you've got to have your group. You know, whether it's men, women, or whatever, but you need your emergency group. And that's what we started, and then we became great friends. So that group was influential. And then just reading books, I learned a lot from my husband. I learned a lot about law, ranching, farming, economy, stoic attitude. I never took a day off work being sick until I got cancer, which was pathetic. I don't recommend you do that now, but that's what the farmers had to do. They had to go to work, you know, or a rancher. So anyway, and now my influencers are my children. They've got it together, and it's just fun to watch them and how they handle different things. And I keep learning. I just keep learning. There are some good stories that we didn't cover yet about way back when. Should we do some of that?
What stories?
The ones about what it was like for women back in the 70s and 80s.
So this is the question here. Yeah. How does it compare in the 60s, 70s, and 80s to now?
How does it compare?
Yeah.
Here's some examples. I worked all year with the state on economic development. The governor said after I graduated and everything, why don't you go over to economic development? They've got a position open there to work with it in the state. Why don't you go over there and talk to them about it? I did, got an appointment, walked in, and the guy said, what are you here for? I said, the governor had said, you have a job open for that, and I'm really interested. I've spent the year, promoting South Dakota. He said, no, we're hiring a guy for that. Do you type? Though we have a secretarial job open. And I did not learn to type on purpose in high school. I wouldn't learn because I didn't want a job like that. That didn't fit me. And so I went back and I said, well, I guess you're going to hire all men. And that's the kind of thing. Another story, and I have permission to tell this story. One of our legislators from the Black Hills was young, very effective, had a baby with her husband, had it at the Capitol, but before she had the baby, one of the lobbyists for that opposed Equal Rights Amendment and opposed women moving forward said she will be an unfit mother because this person that was having the baby was for the Equal Rights Amendment and all. And she took it to a point of talking about seriously, when that baby's born, of taking it away from the mother. They had to have special security around her house because some other things were happening. She was getting attacked like she was going to be harmed because of her attitude on women. And again, she was a typical woman of the time, you know, involved in her community, and her mom and dad were well respected, and so was she, and those kind of things were happening. They became threatening. I remember I was working really hard. We were having a statewide meeting, and I had overslept that morning, and there were some activities that were going to be happening, and I just knew I had to rush to get to work. I ran through a red light. It was yellow but turned red before I went through it anyway. Policeman stopped me, came up to the window, wanted my driver's license. I gave it to him, and he goes, "Oh, you're that woman." And I said, "That woman? That feminist." And it was the first time I realized people can hate because of ideas. An idea can cause more hurt in the head than a headache to some people. And that's when I learned that ideas are powerful for hatred, conflict. And during that time, it's like they tried to put us in pigeonhole boxes where, because we were working for a public policy issue, we must be this, and none of that was true in my situation. And it comes down to what happens when you do a public policy issue. There are a couple of things that happen. One is, it's a soapbox. Somebody stands on a soapbox, and somebody walks by and said, "Oh, they're nuts. What do you mean, that idea? You know, I've never heard of that idea before. That'll wreck everything." And soapboxer keeps going on, and sometimes they have to yell a little louder for people to hear, and then somebody else walks by and said, "Now, wait a minute. I'd like to hear a little bit more about this." And then the third stage of development and public policy that brings this kind of stuff is the statesperson that said, "You know what? This is right for America. This is a good idea. This is right for America." And they get it finally passed. They get it to where it works. They make the social change or policy change. And I think what's important is that people understand where they are on that continuum. I was seen as a soapboxer, and then I think eventually improved to where the recognition became to where I could also be a statesperson. And sometimes you just have to keep dripping on people till an idea gels and compromise, and make it happen. And there are people, if they want to do public policy work or make changes in a culture, have to realize that. And I would definitely recommend people know where they are on that continuum when they start. But those were some of the things that really happened. The issue with women was frightening for housewives that felt like things are going to make me come out of my role that I want, that our family wants, and I'm going to have to earn money, and I'm going to have to do this or that. They felt it was a very threatening time. But here we are today. My son knows how to work with women. My daughter is a lawyer. I mean, there are now more women in med school and law school than there are guys. I worry about the guys now, too. I want them to have opportunities. But I think that there's more of an acceptance of choice. When we were young, nobody ever said, what do you want to do? We were brought into the counselor's office as a senior in high school, and we were to talk about our future plans. And the first thing they said is, well, you need to probably go to college. You've got the grades. You probably could get in and get your teaching degree for insurance. So if something happens to your husband, you'll have a way to support your children. So that was then being a teacher. We all were given that line. I wanted to be in the medical field because I had some relatives in it already. And I thought it was interesting. And the counselor never said, what are you thinking you'd like to do? And it was always assumed on the roles. And so often for years and years, nobody said, what would you like to do? I think today, everybody says, well, what would you like to do? And the choice is, I have family members that have chosen to stay home. I have family members that do both. They just can't imagine not going to where their interests are. And that's where it's fun now in my later part of life is, oh my gosh, I'm doing everything I want to do. And I'm just having the best time. To rest is to rot in some ways. I remember in 8th grade, I had a saying that I lived with all my life, and it was from some Annie Mame play, I think, and I was in debate and declam and that kind of thing, and it was live life with intensity that's shown through enthusiasm. And somehow that pops up all the time. And it's just a fun way to live, rather than, oh my gosh, everything's happening to me. Oh my gosh, this is too complicated. No, when I got cancer and I was a young girl, still, I felt I was, it was like, oh my God, life goes on whether you plan it or not. I mean, with families, you have to plan every minute. I lived out in the country, and who's doing what and all of that, and all of a sudden I couldn't do any of that. And life just kept going on. Didn't crash. We all made it. So we sometimes have to just give up our days, and I just think life can be what we make it, and it might as well be cheerful and enthusiastic and happy.
Was it that attitude, do you think, that helped carry you through those bouts with cancer?
Oh yeah, that attitude. I think that they don't know what part that plays yet. Like, I've been on several studies with Mayo Clinic on cancer because I've had it 4 times. And I go there and they fix me. They just fix me. And I'm due for a bunch of DNA testing coming up. It's something new that they have. They're going to test me for 47 different cancers. They just pop up. And we can maybe relate them to other things, but we don't know. We don't know what chemicals are doing to our bodies. We don't know what stress does. They think stress changes your DNA. We don't know so much. And so, yeah, that attitude does, because I remember I had tubes hanging out of my arm here because they put what they call a PICC line to my heart for the chemo. And that was before they drill a hole in you and put a port and bump it there, but they put a line in here. So I had these tubes hanging out and everything, and I was going to work anyway, and the people that I'm meeting with can't stand it. And so I realized I need to start covering up some of that. And I remember one day my staff was just ornery, and part of it was there were days I wasn't there, you know. I might be gone in the morning or something. But work also helped me through this to try to normalize things. And I remember taking off my wig, bald as a bat, and I said, this is what cancer looks like. You guys, I'm not at the top of my game. And all of a sudden, I took great care to try to look normal. And all of a sudden, they realized I'm not. But you have to keep a good attitude. Don't practice dying. Dad wanted me to pick out where we'll all be buried. And I said, Dad, I can't do that now. I can't pick out my grave right now because I'm not going to die if I start thinking that way. And he just was really upset that I didn't pick it out. And I just thought, I can't even go there. I mean, I should have probably done that because now we're not all together. But, you know, you have to just keep going. But then I'm curious. I love life. I love learning new things. I mean, just adventure is wonderful. Just taking advantage of these few years we're on this earth. And so it's part of the attitude, I think, that does keep you going. I was in chemo, and I brought popcorn, and my nurse figured out where to get a TV, and we put a movie in there, and she put me with a young mother who had cancer because she was going downhill attitude-wise and health-wise. And she thought it would help her if I'm there and we're laughing and we're not treating everything so seriously. And a couple things happened while we're in that room. One is a man that was also to have been there said, that's it. I'm not doing any more. I'm going to let God just take me. Thy will be done. And they said, but you have a good outcome, possibly. And he goes, I'm just not going through it anymore. He gave up that day. And he did it by phone. He didn't even come in. Then another thing happened where a doctor came by and said, what are you doing in here? Said, we're watching a movie. Said, this is a hospital. Said, yeah, we're taking our chemo. And they didn't have the regular chemo stuff that they have now. You can tell it's a chemo lab. Now we're just in a hospital room, you know, and the nurse is in there eating popcorn with us. And even the medical field like that, I think, has changed their mind. Like they said when I first got cancer, oh, it can't be cancer because it hurts. Cancer doesn't hurt. I felt it. It hurt. It was far enough where it was taking my muscles and grinding them up like that, and it hurt. Well, you're too young to have cancer. That's not true. They're having it younger and younger and younger every year now. And so you just have to go on your road and just say, this too shall pass. I remember two phrases that got me through. One was, this is the day the Lord hath made. Rejoice and be glad in it, whatever it brings. And the other one was, thy will be done. And it took off the pressure. I think as Americans, we put so much pressure on ourselves. Try to be right about everything. Try to be smart about everything. Don't mess up. Stay out of the ditches. You know, it's got to be perfect. It doesn't have to be. So I think we're very good as a society now, still working toward things. There's always room for improvement, no matter what. Things change.
The question you can answer if you want to or not. from Pat Miller, thoughts on the first woman governor?
Thoughts on the first woman governor? Well, first of all, I think it's wonderful that that option is open now. The second thing is, I don't think we should begrudge our leaders that want to do more. I remember George McGovern wanted to run for the presidency, and he did, but people used to complain about it. I remember Tom Daschle, who was our senator, and they complained because he had $1 million house. Now we understand in his environment that's not exceptional. $1 million home in South Dakota at that time was exceptional. But they criticized those desires to have leadership and move on. And I know now that there are some that are criticizing our governor because she's spending time moving on into the national scene. I think, however, with all of that, South Dakota taxpayer money shouldn't be spent to do that ambition. And we don't know where that lies. So I don't want to begrudge her at all. I think if I can be free to talk about this, I think that there was another woman before her that people really did want to become governor, and that was Stephanie Herseth Sandlin. I mean, I remember sitting all one Saturday doing the pros and cons about running and what you can affect and what you can't affect. And Democrats and Republicans alike wanted her as governor, the first female. And I was with her 3 weeks ago, and I said, "So, are you glad for your decision?" And she said, "This is where I'm meant to be. I can have more influence here." And she's doing a dynamite job at president of Augie and the impact that she's made. And so in a sense, I think she opened the door because people were really thinking about her. And they were willing at the time to put a highly qualified woman in as governor.
Good. Good.
Covered everything?